information is going to be shared with us, and hopefully make some plans for smoother sailing on future budgets. So with that, I'm going to recognize County Manager Cindy Coder.
Thank you very much, and good morning. And first, I really want to thank all of you for giving 4 hours out of your day today to talk about something that I think is probably one of the most important issues that local government deals with on an annual basis, which is the budget of the services that we provide to the residents of our community. I wanted to identify some of the things that we hope to accomplish over the next few hours today. And I've met with each of you individually, and you have shared with me some of your thoughts as to modifications and enhancements you would like to the budget process for fiscal year 2019. Ed Gagnon is here with us today, and Ed is a excellent facilitator. County staff has worked with him quite a bit, especially on our customer service initiative. And he's really going to focus on identifying areas that you as a board are interested in receiving as part of the budget process. For example, are there service areas that you want more information on? Are there programs that the county does that you would like additional information? So any information that you can share today to help us focus in on what your priorities are, to me, is going to be absolutely essential to the success of this process. Ed is also going to be speaking to you about establishing some principles for budget development. And the reason we think that this is important is that so the board can identify what your priorities are as we go forward, so that I, who is responsible for delivering the budget to you, can ensure that we meet your particular objectives. The last thing that we will be doing today is going over the budget calendar that we have put together, and we want your feedback on that particular calendar to see whether or not we have hit on the points that are important to the board. Our executive directors are here this morning. The reason I have asked them to be here, this is intended to be an informal session, to be an interactive session, that if there are questions that you have as we go through the process for them, they are here to respond to those questions. So, and I also think it's important for them to see this process unfold, since they are also extremely involved in the budget process. I also would like to thank Crystal Crump, our Register of Deeds, and Sheriff Kathy, and with their sheriff's office, obviously, and Dottie Thompson, his business manager, are with us today as well. So my goal is that this is a very successful process, that you all tell us what your expectations are. And again, I just really want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to spend and putting something together that I think will lead us into the 2019 budget process. So, thank you.
Right. Thank you. And now we'll be hearing from Ed Gagnon.
Thank you very much, and I echo what the county manager was saying in terms of my appreciation for the interviews that we conducted with you all. It really helped to frame the time that we're going to be spending together today. So we want to make a good, efficient use of your time. And just to let you know, you have a couple different items in front of you. You have the agenda, and I'll just briefly walk through that. The county manager already addressed it, but basically we're going to break up our time into three different segments. The first, we are going to be talking about where would you like to have work sessions regarding which particular areas, programs, agencies, etc. Then we're going to take a break, so we'll go for about an hour, 15 minutes, take a break. The second box, the second area that we're going to be talking about really is guiding principles, where it gets into those points the county manager was referring to, where we're trying to set some parameters, some goals that the staff can work within when they're developing a preliminary budget for y'all to review. Again, take a break, and then we'll come back and review a draft of a budget process flow, a month-by-month flow for the year. On the back of that document, you'll just see the names of the folks who are in the room. So that way, if you have questions about a specific service area, you'll know who to refer to. The other document that just the commissioners have in front of them is just a basic sheet. I'm going to ask y'all to just take some notes and do some individualized considerations and brainstorming during our time together. So that way you have a good opportunity to take notes there. So are there any questions before we actually get into the materials? Okay. It's going to be pretty low tech, but we are going to have a PowerPoint where we're going to run through a couple slides periodically with you all. So if I could direct your attention to the PowerPoint. For the retreat today, one thing that we noticed was you all wanted to start the budget process earlier. That's exactly what we're doing right now. We're starting basically at the end of October, so we'll have a good 7 or 8 months to go through the process systematically. We want to identify those work session topic areas, and when I talked about setting parameters or guiding principles for the budget process for this year, we're going to look at it from 2 different perspectives. One is inflows or revenue. So we want to get your guidance on those different sources of revenue for the county. So essentially we're going to look at a breakdown for the most recent, the current fiscal year of how the revenue comes into the organization. We're going to make sure that everybody has clarity on what all those revenue sources are and see if you have any guidance about how the county should draft the budget, reviewing those revenue flows. Evaluating expenditures, we also need guiding principles from you all because obviously the county manager, the executive directors are working with staff on the staff requests. And there's going to be a process that these folks go through in determining whether or not they want to include in a draft budget to you all certain requests that are coming in. Well, we want to make sure that the decisions that the staff, the executive directors, the county manager are making in formulating that draft budget on expenditures is in line with what your goals are, so that they are making some decisions and creating the draft that are going to align with the decisions you're going to make when you actually approve the budget later this year. So we're going to look at that in some detail, and then like I said, we're going to refine and finalize a month-by-month budget building process, and then the county manager is going to lead us through that part. So that's what we're going to be accomplishing today. And we're going to just jump right into it. We're going to look at areas requiring board topic information sessions. So I'm going to pass around the sheet to y'all, and this is for the folks around this part of the table, and then this is a copy for the folks on the perimeter as well. And when you're looking at this document, it's a 2-sheet document, and essentially it lists all the different program areas, the different divisions within the county. So when you're looking at this, it's page 1, page 2. And I'll describe the structure, and then I'll describe how we're going to be utilizing this today. So if you look down the left side, I'm on page 1. You're going to see the executive director listed. So as we have questions or clarity or just trying to hone in on which of these particular areas we want to learn more about through work sessions, if we want to ask somebody in the room a question, their information's there. We have the service area name. The next column says the division name, and then the program name, and then the far right column just has a reference number. Because there's so much information here on 2 pages about the different programs, agencies, departments within the county, just to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. I'll be referencing the reference numbers a good bit, ask that you all do so as well, just as we have questions. So when we actually had our one-on-one interviews, it was interesting because I was obviously asking you about yourself and why you joined the board, and some of the things you hope to accomplish for the community through your role in the board. And then I was also asking about, are there certain departments or agencies or programs where you'd like a little bit more information? And y'all were very open and willing to share that, so I appreciate that. And this is a summary of the different areas that y'all have described. So some of y'all mentioned DSS or Human Services, and that's an area where you want to learn a little bit more information in preparing for the budget. You might want to have a work session. Some folks mentioned fire, the library. Public Works was mentioned in a couple different ways, sometimes very specifically about water and sewer, sometimes just in general. In chatting with y'all, the school system, obviously, the sheriff's office, and the community college. So these are the areas that each of y'all in some way, shape, or form address that, yes, these might be good candidates for the work session. So what we have as an opportunity for the work sessions is maybe anywhere from 10 to 14 slots where we can have folks come in and present to you. And we'll talk about whether it is Human Services or fire or the library. And what we want to do in this first initial time together is hone in on what are those 10 or 14 areas where you really want to get more information to inform your budget decisions. What I'd like to do before you look at the full list is look at the list that y'all came up with during the interviews and literally just systematically go one by one, ensure that this is still an area that you want to have as a point of discussion, and in some cases see if we need to narrow down that list at all. So let's start with DSS as an example. The numbers that you see there, 36 to 39, reference the right-hand column. So just so we're all looking at the same items. A couple of y'all referenced wanting to have information on Human Services and Social Services in particular, in that division name column is listed there. There's 4 different programs in lines 36 to 39 here for DSS. We have Social Services Administration, Adult Services, Child Welfare, Economic Services. So what I'd like to do is just to kind of get your thoughts. If you would like information during a work session on DSS, on social services, are you looking for one of those particular areas that's in that program name column? Are you more concerned just getting a good broad overview of all the services, all the expense-related needs in that particular department? Just curious about how specifically you want to identify what within human services you want to review. So thoughts? Yes,
Well,
Mr.
I'd say item 32 is something that we need to address. It is an area we've got shortcomings in right now.
So number 32.
Yeah, 32, but actually, excuse me, actually from a standpoint, 31 through 39 could probably loop together. They're kind of under the same umbrella.
Okay. Other thoughts on that? Mr. Simpson? Would you want to have a broad-based review of a lot of these different areas that we're referring to, even outside of social services, including public health, for example? Would that be beneficial to have a discussion on those?
Well, I think the more information we have, the better decisions we can make, and then once we get a little broader scope, maybe then we can narrow it down and maybe come back with a specific item.
Okay. Mr. Simpson, thoughts on that?
An agreement, a nice broad overview, and then we can hone in on some of the focus areas once the presentations are done on the overview.
Okay. Commissioner Rushing?
Are we meeting our goals set by the state? If we're not meeting our goals set by the state, why not? What is it going to take? And what are we? What do we have to do to? Do we need additional personnel? Will all the personnel that we approved in the budgets used? But making sure that we're meeting the goals.
Okay.
Not just bare minimum meeting the goals either. Making sure that that department is turning around.
So when you say turning around, so you want to gauge improvement?
Yes.
See if there's improvement going on?
An improvement thing.
Okay. Other thoughts on human services, in particular public health? Mr. Akmus, does that sound like a good approach?
Yeah, I agree. I would be curious to see kind of historically what we have done in the past as far as if additional personnel has been added, what has the result been? Did it result in movement in state goals or quality levels? So I don't want to just assume that additional staffing is going to fix the problem if that's not where the issue lies.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a great point. When we actually get into guiding principles, that's one of the questions I'll be asking y'all. If there is a request for additional staffing, or if there's a request for something that impacts the operating budget, what is some of that criteria you're going to use to determine whether that investment is worth it? So you can have something to weigh against the request. What is the value we're getting from it?
And that's a good point too, that the personnel there, that we understand how much they're funded by the state or federal government versus local tax dollars.
Okay, so the funding sources within this area in particular.
Yes, for personnel, I know there's a 75-25 split, a 50-50 split, I think, on some of those. Making sure that we understand how those splits are working.
Okay. Any other thoughts, comments on that?
Actually, tying it back together. Sometimes when we set a goal, we set a timeline. Most of the time we don't. It's kind of open-ended, and we need to, on this particular, plus all the areas, when we have a target, we need to plan to that target and be held accountable for achieving our goals.
So the goals have those target dates.
Instead of it being open-ended.
Okay, great. Any other discussion on that first area? All right, the second area that was brought up was fire. This was brought up a couple of different times. It's actually on line 26, Fire Marshal's office. This was, as I mentioned, brought up by a couple different commissioners. First of all, is this an area where, as a part of the budget development process, you would like to have a work session, learn more about what goes in? Yes, I'm hearing from Mr. Helms, Mr. Simpson. Is fire a priority to learn more about as part of one of the work
I think it's
sessions?
been a priority for some time. I'm not sure we've reached a solution, but it's certainly been a priority.
And Ed, if I might just
Sure.
interject for a moment, I don't know if the board saw the email I sent out last night, but we have put a request for proposal on the street for a consultant to look at our funding of our volunteer fire departments, and responses are due. Those who wish to participate potentially as a consultant, the 29th of November.
Thank you. Yes. So, Mr. Simpson, thoughts on fire? Is there anything, first of all, is that a priority for you to get more information on? If so, anything specifically you want to make sure the staff present as it relates to that area?
Absolutely, I think that's a core service of government, is protection of the residents. So we need to address it and really put it to bed once and for all.
Mr. Aikman?
Agreed.
Any other comments, Mr. Rushing, on there? Okay. All right, great. The next one is the library. The library is on lines 13 and 14 that's listed here. 13 is noted as libraries administration. 14 is the branches themselves. So in looking at the library, I just wanted to have a discussion. Is this an area where you want to make sure we do have a work session? If so, what might be some of the focus of that particular board topic information session?
I would say that naturally, as a result of the approval of the bond for Western Library, that certainly this would be a topic of discussion, but I would say that like DSS, it would help me if we started out at the community services level and got sort of a broad understanding of what are the long-term needs of cooperative extension, parks and rec, all the various agencies within community services, and then hone down on the library maybe.
Okay, so start broader. So we're looking at rows 10 to 18, so that full area. Maybe start broader and then get more detailed or more focused.
And I'm sure it'll come up
on
later,
individual
but
areas.
one of the my points I think that came up or specifically was there are areas in each one of these that have to do with capital needs, part of the capital plan. So hopefully those will be identified, whether it's fire, library, community services, they will be identified so we can begin to put a long-term capital plan.
All right. Other thoughts on maybe starting more broad with community services and then narrowing down the library after that initial, Mr. Aikman?
That's a good idea.
Okay.
We have a library board, so we have some outside boards that I think we as commissioners give them targets as well to get back, because we depend on their feedback. The new bond, as Jerry mentioned, we're waiting for information from them.
Okay.
So we need to communicate to our boards, and we have a number of boards, what our expectations are.
Just out of curiosity, does that impact the timing in terms of when you'd want to have this information session? In other words, do you want to have this earlier so that you have that additional information to inform whatever communication you have to the library board, or actually the opposite, where you want to give them time to put together information and provide to you and then review that as a part of this work session? I'm just curious about the timing.
Well, I think it's critical that they understand what we're trying to achieve. So, if they don't know that we're expecting something or looking for something, it may get pushed down the road where it becomes more of they realize it's more of a critical need for us, that they can certainly look to take action on it sooner.
Okay. So maybe have this on the earlier side of your work session. Mr. Rushing, thoughts? Okay. Mr. Simpson, does this sound like a good plan, starting broad, doing this particular work session early, and then narrowing it to maybe a future work session or discussion of the library in particular if need be?
Well, I think honestly, the broad to a narrower scope could be mentioned or stated for every one of these departments. When we get the budget, we usually have the book already, and that process has already gone down to at least a preliminary budget. And I think having the conversations early so that we understand why some of these requests are being made, even if it's a 5 or 10 minute discussion from every department, at least then we have some basis of understanding without having to keep going back and forth on why is this in here.
Okay. So as we go through these then, like Public Works is a great next example because there were a couple of subgroups that were listed there. That might be a guiding principle for us today is do we want to structure these where it is broad, but we have enough specifics, so if we do a follow-up work session, we know exactly why we're going to the library in a follow-up. Is that correct? Okay. Mr. Simpson, does that sound good as well? Any other discussion on the community services work session? The next one listed is Public Works. Obviously there's 12 different areas listed. It's on page 2 of your document, lines 47 to 58. And looking at Public Works, when I met with you all, some said literally, let's just look at Public Works. It's a big area, we want to learn more about it. Some were really honing in on water and sewer, solid waste services. So my assumption based on what Commissioner Simpson just suggested was you might want to start with a broad-based overall Public Works work session and then get enough detail in the individual service areas to narrow it down in a follow-up session. But I don't want to assume that applies here as well. Any thoughts or conversation about that?
Well, for me, this is a huge capital budget, so I think having, again, another review of where we stand in the capital budget planning process, just for me, it's an annual review to understand, has anything changed since our last discussion? What's the cost? Is it covered by the fees? And then what are we looking for long-term? Has anything changed from our original long-term plan?
Okay, so this sounds like, again, if we can have historical data, trending information, it's conveying how service levels, expenditures, staffing, et cetera, has been trended over time up until today. That's very beneficial in this area. Talking about capital impact, how that's going to impact the budget, changes from what the original plan was. Other points that y'all want to make sure you discuss as it relates to Public Works, at least in this initial, more broad-based conversation.
Actually, Public Works is probably the largest, the entity that has the largest projects. We've got one that's probably historically the largest in the county. So having a update other than the legal aspect, but have an update on the impact that it's going, understanding the plans a little better. And this actually goes past the budget because it's a critical item that we need to be able to articulate to our citizens because we get a lot of questions in that area.
Okay, so that clarifying the current plans, where we are today, if they have been changed, that relates into communicating with the community. So it's not just what's going on, but what is a way that we can convey what's going on with Public Works plans over the next 12 to 18 months with our constituents in the community as well. Okay. Mr. Rushing, thoughts?
We need to have some serious public discussions of our ability to provide services for planning, not only for necessarily just for residential customers, but commercial, being able to provide commercial sewer and water. I think this year is going to be a very important year of planning and a lot of decision making on what our direction is going to be going forward. If we're the issue, whether it's legal issues or whether it's just ability to provide, we're going to have to make some decisions on what's important to us. Is that commercial important, more important than residential, which I think is important. In the past, it said is very important to us. Where do we go from here? And start letting the players in the thing, whether it's developers, whether it's commercial entities, whether it's economic development, kind of know our direction.
So I'm hearing a couple different key points that you're stating. One is when you're being provided information, make sure it's clearly articulated if this is purely for residential, purely for commercial, because that might, based on the priorities of the community, that might inform your decision making. Is that correct?
Yeah, it would help, I think it would help the folks that are looking at developing property know what we're looking for ahead of time.
Okay.
And if we need to start holding back for commercial, we need to make those decisions and start, start make sure that we got enough to cover that growth that we have.
Okay. All right, and again, kind of tying into what Commissioner Helms said, this is an area where communicating with the community, and it's not just the citizens, but it's also obviously the development community, the business community as well, is going to be very important. Understanding what the current plans are, but also understanding how they relate to residential versus commercial, and being able to communicate with your different constituent groups, what decisions you're making, why, what the plans are, that sort of thing. Mr. Atkins, thoughts on this?
Sounds good.
With our new bypass, Public Works, water and sewer is probably the largest impactor on economic growth in the county. And so to be able to project out long range, we need to have a good solid plan on how we grow that entity to support our community.
Okay. So when we were talking about plans here, and then this is just my lack of understanding or making an assumption, I was assuming this was physical growth plans of water sewer capabilities throughout the county, but it sounds like what you're also saying is let's look at the financial plan for enacting that, and what does that look like projected out? Is that what you're referring to?
What our capabilities are. So it's one of the biggest impactors on economic growth, but it's also one of the larger cost factors in the county that we need to be able to understand what our capabilities are.
So capital, operational, financial, all those different areas we're referring to plans. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments on Public Works? Okay. The next area we're going to be talking about is the school system. And I know that the county manager is going to talk about the school system when we actually get into the budget process. There is a joint meeting that's a part of that process that's being designed that y'all will take a look at and be able to refine as well if need be. But in terms of the school system, it's listed on 76 and 77 here, school direct support, indirect support. Outside of that joint meeting that is going to be referenced in the budget process that the county manager is going to be going through, is there that desire to have work sessions similar to these other areas specifically for the school system? And if so, help me understand the scope a little bit of what you'd like to address in those work sessions.
Well, my position is, they really need to present the information to us and help us understand it. I think it's more inherent that they present the information and allow us to ask questions and understand it versus trying to have county staff kind of be the intermediary, if you will. So I personally think I would prefer to keep it as a board-to-board, staff-to-staff type of presentation at a joint meeting.
Other thoughts on that? Mr. Simpson? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
I think we need to not only have a meeting in November, but we need to have that meeting after the budget is presented, which is late in the budget process. So there's not a whole lot of time from when the school system presents it to the county for us to review it. And I think it's key that we have at least one meeting where they, to determine April's point, we understand what those needs are and why they're asking for that.
Okay. So maybe have a meeting literally next month, and then one or more meetings at the budget process to have dialogue at that point for the board, as you said.
There's only 6 weeks from the time they present it until the time we have to approve a budget. So somewhere in that 6 weeks, we need to have at least one meeting, if not more.
Okay. No, Mr. Hill, sorry.
Actually, I've been contacted by some school board members wanting to actually sit down with us, individual commissioners, maybe 2 of us, because that's where our limit is, and talk about the November 20th budget, not budget meeting, but our meeting on the 20th to ensure that we address the right items and having that ongoing communication. This is a new option for us. It's, I think it's exciting because we've got board members that want to work with us. And so, you know, I hadn't had, as a matter of fact, I've had that conversation the last couple of days, so I hadn't had an opportunity to share with my peers that they're reaching out to have this conversation, which I think would be a good opportunity.
Any questions for Mr. Helms about those conversations? Any questions y'all have on that, or any thoughts?
The only point I'd make is the school budget has always been one of those things that comes in late because we're waiting to hear from the state, we're waiting to hear from federal. At the same time, there's always the issue for me of affordability. So I think early on we may want to establish some parameters so we have an understanding of within reason what those levels of capital spending and what those levels of operational increase may be limited to.
Mr. Rushing, thoughts on the school system or any of the conversation we've had so far?
Yeah, and I'll talk about this more when we get back to the accounting stuff, but, you know, I think last year they really worked to stay within what our staff told them was their, what their tax rate would generate. They took that number and tried to work their budget in. I think they need that again. I think that worked really well. They actually came up even better, you know, at the end of the day. But they know what their rate is going to generate. I heard that over and over again. You know, we're staying within our rate. We're staying within our rate. I think that's admirable. I think that's what we need to make sure they understand, and we need to help them do everything they can to stay within that rate, and we need to do the same. But if working with them from their rate and how much additional revenue that generates is important, and the people in the public need to hear that as well, how much that rate generated.
Mr. Aikman's thoughts?
Good.
Mr. Simpson? Mr. Simpson, does it sound like a good plan? Mr. Helms, anything to add? Okay. So from a school system standpoint, I think it's beneficial. The county manager may address it a little bit as well when she goes through the budget process, as I mentioned, but it sounds like this is going to be outside the scope of the typical board topic information sessions, those work sessions. Is that correct? Okay. The next item is the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office is actually 60 to 70 on page 2 in the document. And when you look at 60 to 70, there's a lot of different areas. You see the division names listed there: administration, detention, patrol, etc. There's a lot of individual areas within the sheriff's office. I wanted to get a sense from you all just to confirm that, yes, you did want to have a work session with the sheriff's office, and if so, do you want to go with that approach? We talked about some of the other areas where you have a broad-based work session, and maybe a follow-up work session with one of the individual areas, or is this a case where there are certain areas in particular that you want to focus on? So, initial thoughts? Mr. Hill?
Well, I think the sheriff office is probably information more than anything else. Sheriff has demonstrated that managing his unit has been a focus item for him, and therefore he has budgetary items has not been an issue, my understanding, in the sheriff's office. They have some needs, and some needs that we probably need to address, and that information session will help us focus in on those that we need to take care of.
Mr. Simpson?
Agreed.
Mr. Rushing, thoughts on the sheriff's office, having a work session with them?
Yeah, I've been very pleased to learn how much they save and how they save money. I think it's very admirable of the sheriff's office and what they're doing, and you know that should be more public information, that people understand what a good job they're doing with savings. When they can find savings, they find them, they use them, and then they turn that back over to the county. So, are those savings something that we need to put back into the sheriff's department? Is there something that we're missing, is there something we need there? If they're just cost savings, do we give them back to the sheriff and use them for something else next year? But it seems like they're doing a very good job with their budgeting, and very, very satisfied with what it's doing.
So just to clarify one point, so are you wanting to look back at recent savings that they had in their budget and see if those savings that took place can be addressed in the upcoming budget, the needs that were not addressed?
Well, I think during the budget, we always, we can always put that back in to, if there's something needed, and again, just that they continue to find ways to cut costs and save money, and then that they don't, look at it as well, it's the end of the year, let's spend it, and they actually give it back. It's a very good policy, I think, that the sheriff's office has, and I hope they continue to find lots of savings.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Simpson?
I think information focused really on a 3 to 5 year plan on what are their needs as the county continues to grow.
And Commissioner Akers?
Yeah, I agree with all that, but again, I go back to historically, kind of an outline of what we have put into the sheriff's department. I know over the years we've contributed a great deal of our funds to the growth in the sheriff's department, and kind of want to see, what has been the result of those investments.
Okay, so along with the 3 to 5 year plan, again, it's a word I've used a few times that y'all suggested, but historically, kind of look back and see how expenditures have changed, how services provided, scope, scale have changed as well. Historically, is that essentially what you're saying?
Yep.
Okay. Anything else on the sheriff's office? Okay. The last item we have up there is the community college, and the community college is referenced in 71. This came up in maybe 1 or 2 different conversations. And again, it's the same question I'm asking. In this case, it's about SPCC. But when you look at the community college, is this an area that you would want to have a work session to discuss and learn more about? I'll start there as part of the budget process.
I find that when we meet with the board, with SPCC, that's very informational to me, and I think that that's a good time to go over their information and see what they need, especially with the bonds that we're going to be putting over. I think we put out the bonds today, right?
Yes, we're selling, yeah.
So I think it's going to be very important this year is find out what their plans are for expansion.
Is that one of those board-to-board type of interactions that you're referring to in the school system as well, as opposed to a work session, as we typically describe?
We have an advantage with the board since Chairman Akins is a member of that board as well. So they seem to work very well with us. And matter of fact, they help us with our schools as well and other activities. Probably a brief information update would be interesting and beneficial.
So brief between the 2 boards, is that what you're referring to, or in the form of a work session?
Personally, Frank could probably give it. Not trying to put the pressure on you, but he's abreast of what's going on probably better than the rest of us because of the internal details he sees.
Ms. Kyle, did you have a question? Or?
Well, I did. Are we talking about the bond issue with the board, like an update as to where they are in letting the projects, et cetera, or are you talking more about the operational components or both?
Minimally both.
Okay.
Because I know they're actively seeking land to place it, if I'm not mistaken. And just an update on that, because there's been discussion of ties between that and the library, and so that's fact that it's going to materialize, it'd be good for us to know early on.
So maybe a brief work session on SBCC, is that what you're suggesting?
You know, we're going to have plenty of work sessions. I think we could probably take communication and not make it a work session.
Okay.
What do you think, Frank?
Well, you know, obviously the community college is a huge factor in our economic development and workforce development. So I don't, you know, I certainly don't want to make light of the opportunity to have interaction with SBCC and their board and staff. But I guess the only piece that I would be interested in knowing is if there are budgetary requests where things that may have impact on workforce development or economic development, that we do have a good understanding of where, if we could provide additional funding in that arena, it may help stimulate growth in those two particular areas. So again, I don't know that a work session is necessary as much as just maybe additional communication as those requests come in.
Commissioner Simpson, are you good with this approach for the community?
I am. I don't necessarily need a board-to-board session, but just a general update on any, again, long-term needs. The bond is going out there. They're working on that. But are there any other needs that are larger capital projects that need to be included or planned for in that 3 to 5 year window?
Okay. Any other discussion on SBCC? Based on the approach that we've talked about at this point, we have DSS, we have fire, library, public works, and the sheriff's office as well that we've identified for work sessions. Now, on several of these, we also identified that we'll probably end up having a more targeted conversation later, like with DSS and human services overall, as well as with the library, as well as with public works. So out of those 5 different areas, 3 we will most likely have additional work sessions. So essentially there's about 8 work sessions that we could pretty much book that are going to cover those 5 areas, or in a follow-up session more detailed. As I mentioned earlier, we have about 10 or 14 slots for work sessions. So I do want to make sure we're looking at all the different program areas, departments, agencies that are on the sheet. So what I'd like you to do right now is I'm actually going to give you some time just to work independently, 3-4 minutes very quickly. And what I'd like you to do is to look through these 2 pages on your document. And if there's any areas that we haven't discussed, but you might potentially want a work session, just simply write down the number on that other document I gave you, or circle the reference number here. But basically, go ahead and to identify, are there 1 or 2 or half a dozen different program areas? Like I said, you can write it down here if you'd like, or just circle the number. And I'll give you a few minutes to work independently, and then we'll just go around the room, do a debrief, and see which of those areas we want to identify. But again, I'll give you maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Just look through pages 1 and 2. If there's any of those program areas we haven't discussed, where you might potentially like a work session, identify them, and then we'll do a debrief. Okay? Thank you. y'all to pause just for a second. We're passing around a document that's also on PowerPoint, and this might help you to determine other areas. This is a sheet that shows expense allocation in the fiscal year 18 budget by department or area. So obviously, you may want to make sure we're covering the areas that have a higher level of expenditures, or maybe it's just another way to identify those areas you may want to have those board topic information sessions on. What you're going to see different on the PowerPoint than what's here is just the percentages. Those top 6 areas that are noted on the screen total about 84% of the total expenditures. So it's fire at 3%, HR at 7%, human services 11%, public works 16%, sheriff's office 8%, and the schools 39%. So I'll give you about 2 more minutes to continue with what you're doing. I just want to give you a little bit more information that might inform, especially on the expense side. We'll talk about the revenue side of that page a little later, but especially on the expense side. I'll give you a little bit more information to use in determining other areas where you're going to want work session. Give you all about 2 more minutes.
I didn't realize you were.
Is this one, is that school or?
No, this is schools.
Yeah.
This is public works. I have to get you some of those glasses.
Human services. Human services.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I'd like to do is pause you, and what we're going to do just as a starting point is just go gentleman to gentleman, and if you could just share, is there a particular number or service area that you'd like to consider? We'll just get a full list from all 5 of y'all, and then we'll actually walk through if that works. So Mr. Russian, can we start with you, please?
Number 59, the register of deeds. You would like some information to make sure that we're, a couple things, you know, in the news lately we've heard about information getting out that shouldn't. You know, are we providing you the ability to do what you need to protect that, and that you're getting your technology money and you're able to, you know, with increased technology, there's benefits and there's drawbacks too. You know, kind of where you're looking at protecting those people's information, I guess. The next one, and this is really, I think, one of the most important ones for me, is number 1, which is budgeting, and then number 20, and with that as well, which is economic development. Basically, I kind of labeled those under 2 things. That's income. I think the very first meeting that we have is how much money have we made? How much in revenue have we got coming in from the decisions that we've made this year? Whether it's been economic development decisions, whether it's been decisions on saving money, if it's money that has been saved by the department heads, savings and increase in tax revenue that we didn't expect. I think that's, you know, usually whenever a family has their discussions on what they're going to do for the year, the budgeting for the year, they're looking at, well, how much did we make? You know, did we lose money? Did we gain money? And if they gain money, then they start laying out priorities. And I think that would benefit the department heads to know that hey, we had $5 million more this year in revenue than we expected. those things that we put off, now it's time to start looking at getting those things in. But being able to come in on the budget, that revenue, again, is one of the most important things to know where we need to go from. It's the same thing with schools. It worked really well with the schools to tell them, this is what your rate generated above and beyond what it did last year. And then they can look at their priorities. And I think we need to do the same. But that would be the very first thing I'd like to hear is what kind of job did we do for the taxpayers? Did the decisions that we made benefit or hurt the taxpayers? And if we're getting in increased revenues, we should be talking about that loudly and letting people know that's a very big plus. Just like the sheriff or registered deeds or any other department head that saves money. How much money did that department head save? How much money did that person, contribute back to the tax base that we can offset tax increases and things like that? I think we don't brag enough on the job that we do, and I think that that's the number one thing. I mean, it's almost like just an afterthought because we've already got the budget in hand. I mean, if you're doing a good job, talk about it, and I think that people need to hear that. The last thing is EMS. Are we meeting targets? There was decisions made years ago that moved things around. Are we meeting targets? Are we getting people the care that they need in a timely fashion?
Mary. Thank you, Mr. Rushing. Mr. Simpson?
I just tag on to Commissioner Rushing's point about the budget. I think it's important that we communicate to staff what our desires are in terms of limitations or revenue neutral, or where our thought process is in terms of end goals. Need to communicate that early. And then the other thing I'd go back to that I mentioned was we have capital projects in all of these various departments. I think we need to look at somewhat of a long-term capital CIP and put all those projects together as a group so we can prioritize and formulate a strategy to hopefully fund some.
Thank you. Mr. Simpson?
I agree with the capital piece. It's rather than just a short list of 5 or 6 items that are the big wish list tickets. I think we need to put a comprehensive list together on and then prioritize those and find out whether we can do that through ongoing funding or whether they need to have some debt tied to it. But just a comprehensive list, probably a little bit more robust than what we've seen in the past. I'd also like to have a little bit more information on the planning and zoning. We get the information, but there's not a lot of information online or available to the residents to see what's going on in the county from a planning and zoning standpoint. So I would like to see where we stand in terms of that. I know a lot of our municipalities have the ability for the residents to see what's out there, and we don't have that capability. And then also to get in front of it in terms of Commissioner Rushing's statement on how we've spent the money, to make sure we've done the right things. I think it's also important to make sure that we discuss the upcoming revaluation because of the notification we received from the state. So to make sure that the community knows this is something that's being forced on us because of property values, and they need to be aware of the implications.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Helms?
I agree with my fellow commissioners on what they brought forth. But another thing I'd like to have a little more information on, we've got a Board of Elections, some changes there that we need to probably have a better understanding. And that's a offline thing. But also to Commissioner Rushing's EMS, I think that's critical. That's grown exponentially lately. We do have a new program in, and they're much more. They're achieving their targets at a better rate. But I'd still like to have an understanding. We've refreshed their fleet, and that's been expensive. So we need a long-range plan on where that's going to take us, because it's so critical. And the other point I'd like to make is, if you go back, well, on your flip chart on my right, when he has fire, it looks like that's minimal. That's probably one of the largest items that we need to fix. We're fighting a 25-year problem that we need to address this year, and it's going to require a lot of work with, because most of our fire departments are 501c3, so they have independent boards. So we have to really focus on that. That's something we have to resolve this year. We've been putting it off for the last 2 or 3 years. I agree with Commissioner Rushings. I think I'd like to have the Register of Deeds present to us, because I know in past she's had needs, and I don't know that we fulfill those needs. So I think the entire board needs to have an understanding. It may, and you know, something like that may be just a presentation at the commissioners meeting. So.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Herman. Mr. Akins?
I think you pretty well covered it.
I want to address these in a couple different ways. I want to start with Register of Deeds and EMS. Yes, sir.
I was reminded of something, and Commissioner Knight Simpson has said this before too. Along with these, and it's not really any one line item, but trends, noticing trends in the budget, that is very helpful. I know it's very helpful to you, it's very helpful to me to see those trends, and I don't think there was nice as there were in years past. So seeing like what is our budget, what is our actual for at least the last 2 or 3 years would help. Because you've really brought that up in the past. I mean, that's.
Well, my point, we talked about it in the meeting, is that I always look at, are we growing faster than what the county growth rate is? And if we are, what's the justification for that? So if we have needs in, let's say EMS, is our funding and what we're putting into EMS growing faster than the rate of county growth? But why are we doing that? If we're doing it because we want to drive the response time down by 20% improvement year over year, then that's a good reason. But if we're doing it for some other reason, I think we need to understand what the reason for that is. And that historical data gives us some idea on where we've seen the expenditures and what the growth rate's been over the last 5 to 10 years.
And that's a really good example. When we get to guiding principles, and we start talking about expenditures, that example you give about response rate is the kind of thing we're going to be seeking from you all. If people do request additional positions, or there is some growth that's in the budget, what is driving that growth? And is it going to be growth in the community? Is it driving growth in our services? Or is it going to be we're going to be able to improve our response time by this growth? And that's a perfect example of what we're going to look for from y'all in our next part of the agenda as it relates to guiding principles. The 2 areas I want to chat about first, and I'm actually going to go through all these with you all, but just to confirm, Register of Deeds and EMS, it sounded like there's a lot of energy around having work sessions dedicated to Register of Deeds, talking about obviously budget and growth and trends over time, but also information security, what additional needs they have. Then EMS as well, are they meeting their targets? What are their long-term plans, fleet requirements down the road, that sort of thing. Starting with Register of Deeds, is everyone comfortable that is an area where you would like to have a work session?
I disagree with Richard. I'm not sure if take an entire work session, maybe just to update at one of the commission meetings.
Okay.
Item agenda.
Is that good? Okay, so this is more.
And I'd yield to Crystal on that. She may want an entire work session.
Well, 4 hours.
It may not take that long.
What about for EMS? EMS, we're referring to, I assume it's lines 23 to 26. It's the whole set of different services within emergency services, or it's actually 22 to 26, communications, 911, radio management, fire, marshal office, we already talked about, so actually it'd probably be 22, 25. Would you like to have a work session focused on all those different areas outside of fire, since we have a separate work session just for fire?
I think that's one of our critical areas, and I think EMS they give staff a monthly, if not a quarterly update, but the commissioners don't necessarily see that.
Gotcha.
And I think that would be beneficial to understand future needs.
Mm-hmm.
They have we've got a different EMS than we had, 3 years ago? They've made significant gains in meeting the objectives and everything, but still it'd be beneficial to understand where we're at and what anticipated future's going to look like.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes, sir.
You're referring to EMS, the emergency medical services.
Yes.
Union EMS, not emergency, the emergency services?
I was speaking just the EMS.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to
And
be sure.
then, but however, I think one of the most challenging areas has been the 911 center and enhancements that we need to make to that. So I think those updates, we should have at least a quarterly update on that, and that may be accomplished through a commissioner meeting, but we still need to have that dialogue and understand where we are. I think we have one coming up Monday night.
We do, yes, and we are set to do that on a quarterly basis.
And so that will be, I think that will help.
So this information session is purely EMS, but make sure that we do have updates on 911.
Well,
for
if
example,
we're gonna have
and other
a work session, we ought to have all of it rolled in
Okay.
together and have the conversation, but,
Mr. Akins?
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with a work session, but I do think we do need additional communications on it. But I mean, certainly a work session is the best format to impart that information, that would be fine.
Mr. Simpson, thoughts on that?
I think we start with information and get just a presentation on both the 911 and EMS, and then we go from there. Because I think we have to decide, and the staff, are we satisfied with where it is now? Or do we believe that we can do better? Do we believe that the current response time is just the starting point, we need to get down to another level, and what do we need to do that? And that may be a work session to go through that. I think the first understanding is, where are we? And then as a board and staff decide, do we want to do better? Do we need to do better?
So maybe a current state type of presentation to the board, and then based on that, if there's a determination that it would be beneficial later on to have a work session do that. Mr. Rushing, thoughts on that?
You know, just start out with the information and go, or lump it in with the fire service, all the other services together for a work session with that. But, you know, I think just a report, similar to Crystal's, I mean, there's so much information there. If we're doing fine, there's no reason to really go into a detailed meeting about it. If everything's going the way it's supposed to, the trends are better, then we don't need a whole complete dedicated work session just to that.
Mr. Helms, how does that approach sound
well,
to you?
I think getting the information session started, but maybe if we're doing a work session with included, like you say, in the fire piece, because it's all so entwined. I mean, sheriff's department gets pulled into it if there's emergency call. The volunteer fire department shows up, EMS shows up, and a deputy shows up. So it's a huge impact on the resources in Union County. So that would probably combine the work session.
So Mr. Simpson, are you okay with us adding EMS here into that, as a subset of that fire?
I agree, information first, and then if a additional work session is generated, so be it.
Okay. So, all right, so I think I'm getting a sense of two different things. The information to the board, is that in addition to or in lieu of having EMS as a part of this fire work session?
Well, for me, I think life, health, safety is key government services. So if we were going to do something like that, it would incorporate all of those pieces. Just an update on where we stand to see how we as a county are measured up to other areas. Are we meeting the needs of the citizens? And if we're not, or if we are, how can we do better?
Mr. Simpson?
I think the fire issue is going to be very specific. Now, if we have the information surrounding EMS, 911, sheriff's office, all those things, we can make better decisions about the direction to go in with regard to fire. But I think fire funding is going to be a specific work session, and we're going to be focused primarily on that.
Okay, so we could go to the board, information presented to the board, if there's something in that that informs or suggests we should have a conversation about it as a part of the fire work session, then we can do it at that point, make the decision at that point. So it's a timing thing, do that fairly quickly and then have the fire work session afterward. Mr.
Well, the fire is probably mostly going to be our interaction with our volunteer fire departments. I think that's a big challenge we have. And you know, we talked about update from the emergency services, I'll call it, which would be your 911 and your fire marshal and things like that. That can be more informational, but the fire, and Jerry mentioned that the fire funding is one of our biggest issues right now. It's an antiquated process. It's not sustainable. So we've got to address that this year.
That needs to be one of our earliest sessions.
Yes.
Because we tend to start that later in the year and leave us no time for it.
We got 17 entities that have to come to us with their budget and work through identifying the difference between needs and wants.
May I ask a clarifying question? Because I'm trying to decide if we're talking about two different issues or if there's a way to combine them. Certainly, each of the volunteer fire departments submit their budget, and we go through a process, and we certainly can amend that process. The other aspect is that based upon board direction, we are also soliciting for a firm to come to the board and say, okay, here are your options with respect to funding these departments. Here's the recommendations that we believe, which may not necessarily be so much associated with the needs and desires, but more dealing with the methodology piece. So I almost see those almost as two separate issues, and I'm just wanting some clarification to make sure that I understand.
This may not be popular, but I question the need for a consultant to tell us how the county can fund the fire service. Now, we are one of two counties in the entire state that uses the funding methodology that we do. And the other county is currently trying to come away from that methodology at best. So, you know, having a consultant, I question if there's that need. I think we need to start working on it immediately. And if we get to a point that we have to, we hit a log jam and going through identifying how we think it should be. I think we're going to get some information Monday night.
Yes.
On one aspect. I think we need to find out where that is and determine, you know, nothing against consultants, because I own a consulting company, but sometimes that slows the process down. And this is one program that we surely don't need to be slowed down. We pushed it off the back burner for the last 3 years, and it's time to step up and make this happen. And we need to set some definite goals, timelines, and dates that where we're going to be on that, because we can't afford to come to final budget and not know how we're going to be on fire.
And I respectfully disagree,
okay,
because I think we've reached that log jam. What we've been doing doesn't work, so we need somebody who's done it in the past to kind of help us through the process.
I totally agree that what we've been doing is not working. But we've also, I know I've been asking for the information to be presented Monday night for over 2 years and haven't gotten it. So I don't know what that's going to tell us. So, you know.
Other thoughts, Mr. Roche?
I think with working with this issue as we have for a decade or more, that, you know, it might be good to have somebody without emotional connections. You know, I'm sorry, I'm not the biggest fan of consultants, but this is a point where emotion is, I think Jerry and I saw it firsthand when we went through all those meetings, and you know, maybe somebody from the outside looking in. Isn't there a consultant working with several fire departments right now in the West?
There is, yes. The one that, and I apologize, I can't remember the consultant's name, but it's the one who also does their insurance. But yes, he's working with Lake Park, Henry Bridge, Indian Trail, Stallings, and looking at should they maybe have a fire district among those municipalities, so.
And you know, just with having again, it is a very emotional thing, and there's a lot of varied interest in it, and maybe that can take some of that out. I don't know, but
And that's why staff recommended a consultant, because we have, since 2011-12, have approached this issue, and to be perfectly honest, I don't know that we have any new ideas. And I do think someone who has worked in other entities, who has dealt with this very issue, and can provide you a very objective perspective is important.
It's one of the consultants we're looking at, the ones that, we've had several fire studies presented to us in the past. Is that one of the consultants? Because they're very familiar with the county and where
Right.
we're coming from.
We have advertised, we will see who responds. We will determine whether or not we need to interview them, or based upon the response, if there's sufficient of information to make a determination as to who the selected consultant would be. So we had a list of consultants, one of them who I think has done some work for us in the past, and made them aware that we were putting this on the street, so we'll see what we get back.
So decision from a consultant is not something we need to make today, is that correct? I mean, it's still.
Right, it's in the
Don't
process.
have the information.
We're we're advertising in a competitive process right now.
So as it relates to this point, do you still do a fire work session possibly early, depending on how the timing relates to whether or not the consultant's engaged in the timing of that report, and start as it relates to EMS with information to the board? We do have some open work session slots the way this meeting's gone so far, so if there needed to be a special meeting or for EMS or part of a work session where EMS is incorporated, that can be determined down the road. Is that good with everyone, as opposed to identifying today we need to have a separate work session just for EMS? We can defer that until we get more information to the board, to you all. Okay. I wanted to, we'll take a break in just a couple of minutes, but I wanted to actually ask about these other points and ask the county manager to address them. There were points made about income, getting an update on how the inflows are coming. How are we doing year to date, getting an update on that. How do we look like we're going to be trending toward our goals. Having some discussion as well about long-term capital improvement, obviously, that impacts the budget versus actual trends. Starting with those points, I know you're later on in our time together this morning going to be talking about the budget
I believe
process.
we'll be addressing all of those areas.
Okay, so what we might do then is when we get into the budget process, the county manager will talk about when these points are going to be addressed and how, and then you all would have the opportunity, obviously, to modify the timing of that and that sort of thing. But outside of the work session structure, the staff have planned to address these points in the budget process with you all. So just FYI on that. Are there any questions about that at this point? I know we shouldn't gone through the process yet, but those specific points are part of the overall budget process planned out for this year.
If I just might, on planning and zoning, you and I spoke about this a little bit last Monday, and I do have a meeting with Brian later this week to talk about how we might be able to provide information to the public. So we are working on that.
With the revaluation, what is most preferred and appropriate venue for having a conversation about that? Is that a work session? Is that information presentation to you all on the board? Any thoughts on having a conversation about that, or just being rolled into some of the revenue-oriented conversations that you're going to be having in planning for next fiscal year's budget?
I think it would be appropriate in the beginning, at least for the presentation, just so the public's aware of what's out there, what the potential implications are, and if we need to have a work session behind it, we can. But I think at least information at first.
Mr. Simpson, thoughts on that?
You know, it's, I agree with Lance, it's a fact, it's coming, and we need to be proactive, get the information out there, so it's not a surprise to the citizen when it impacts their property.
Mr. Atkins, does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's situationally driven. There's nothing that we don't have any control over. The fact that it has to be done, it's going to happen, and so I don't see a need to devote a work session to it, but certainly the information is good to impart.
Mr. Rushing, does that sound good? Any other discussion on this? As it's set up right now, we have 5 work sessions identified. 3 of those work sessions we know are going to result in additional work sessions because we're talking about the different areas like environmental health, for example. We're going to start out with a broad base and then we'll have a follow-up session to dig deeper in certain areas. So we have 8 different work sessions identified, and we have the potential for more work sessions, obviously, depending on how the upcoming reevaluation goes. So at this point, that's how many we have identified. There are opportunities to add more after you've had initial presentations to the board from EMS, for example. You had the presentation on reval, or maybe there's 2 or 3 separate work sessions that you want to have in environmental health. That can be determined at that point. But it looks like the current strategy is have these 5 work sessions that you all have identified, and then probably we'll have at least 3 additional ones that'll be scheduled after that. But your first 5 most likely, just to let you know, would be environmental health. Fire will be one of your first 5. You'll have one on community services, public works, and you'll also have a work session on the sheriff's office. So those would be the first 5, and then additional ones can be determined during those work sessions or soon thereafter. So does that sound like a good plan for the work sessions to start the budget here? Good approach? Okay. Mr. Simpson?
I guess my question would be, for instance, sheriff's office.
Yes, sir.
Is that a work session, or is that more like register of deeds office and information update and maybe and define work session? Is that an hour-long session? Is that a half a day? Certainly, I think potentially you could have 2 work sessions on the same day.
When you see the budget calendar, that's actually our objective, is that we may be providing you with multiple topic areas on a given day. So, because I don't know that any of them will take up 3 to 4 hours, but I think by grouping some of them together and providing you with updates, at least probably a couple hours so that's what I'll be presenting later to get your feedback as to whether or not that's acceptable.
That's a good question. Other questions, comments?
Well, with the size of the sheriff's department's budget, I mean, that's such a big part of it. It might might do a little bit extra time.
Sheriff, you got any thoughts on that?
It doesn't make any difference to us, we'd be ready.
Fair enough.
Anytime we can spend with the sheriff outside the jail is good, right?
All right, well, why don't we go ahead and take a break, if that's good with y'all, and then we'll transition into our next topic. Would 10 minutes work, or would y'all prefer 15 minutes for the break? 10's good? Okay, we'll start back right at 9:30. Thank y'all.
Next week.
Greatness, and thank you for what you did in our first session. That was excellent, good dialogue, good decision making, and it's pretty clear how we're going to structure the work sessions, especially initially. We're going to transition to a second topic. As you can see, we're going to go through a couple PowerPoint slides, guiding principles for budget development. So obviously the staff is going to go through a process of developing a budget for you, working with you on that, and there's going to be a lot of internal conversations going on, both in terms of looking at revenues and inflows as well as the different expenditures that they would present in your budget later on in the year. So the staff needs your help. They want to make sure that what they will be crafting for you is going to be crafted within the principles that you're going to use, the criteria you're going to use to make decisions on it later on. It'll just be a smoother process that way. So essentially, what we have here is a document that's on the back of that other graph that I passed out to y'all. So if you wanted to look at this close up, this is actually the inflows, the revenues document for fiscal year 18. And what I want to do to start this process of getting your direction and your guidance is to just go through a process of ensuring there's clarity involved. What you're looking at here are the allocations of revenues or the mix of revenues for the organization. Similar to what I did with the expense graph, I highlighted the 6 sources of revenue that were the highest, that made up actually 88% of the total revenue inflows projected for this fiscal year. 48% is coming from the ad valorem taxes and fees, 14% from the enterprise charges for services, 4% for the intergovernmental revenue, federal grants, 8% internal service fund charge, 11% a local option sales tax, and 3% for the non-enterprise charges for service. So before we actually go through a process of understanding what your priorities and goals and parameters are that you want to set around revenues, I just want to go through a quick clarity exercise. So I know this might seem a little bit tedious, but I'm going to do it one by one and just kind of ask you all if you need any clarity or definition around this, and if so, I'll ask the staff, maybe Jeff in particular, to define these better for you. But the first one, ad valorem taxes and fees, is there any question or clarity about what's included in that or the definition of that? Any questions y'all have on that? Okay. Next one, enterprise charges for services. Any clarification you need for what's included in that or the definition? Is that pretty clear? Mr. Helms, any questions on that?
I assume that is utilities.
And solid waste.
Right.
And
This is a gross
Solid
budget
waste.
book,
Oh,
so
okay,
this
yeah.
includes
Utilities and
It's
solid
group.
waste.
Yeah, other than the facilities component, yes.
Okay. Fund balance appropriated, that's pretty self-explanatory. Interfund transfers, any questions about what that includes? Jeff, is there a quick definition for what that's about?
That's just the movement of money that's in between the funds, for instance, to capital funds. So some of that's the inbound transfer in between the funds for services provided across the different. Because you'll get a gross budget look, so this includes everything that's in there. Normally you would net those out.
Okay. Any questions on that? The next one's the intergovernmental revenue, federal grants. Any questions about what's included within that? Mr. Rushing, any comments, questions? Okay. The next one, intergovernmental revenue restricted. And then the next one, intergovernmental revenue grants, and then unrestricted. Actually, Jeff, can you just give a real quick differentiation between those 4 different revenue sources, please?
Sure. The intergovernmental revenue, federal grants, pretty self-explanatory. It's federal grant revenue. The restricted means that there are some strings attached to it that come from the governmental agency provided, either state or the federal government, and we can only use it for the purposes that it's been given to us. You see, a large part of this revenue comes into social services, human services area. The intergovernmental revenue state grants, that's again state grants for specific purposes, and then intergovernmental revenue unrestricted. A lot of that then would be revenue from the state to provide a service, or revenue from the towns, for instance with the sheriff's contracts. Those would be included in that revenue. So it's revenue from another governmental entity, but it's not necessarily restricted. It's for a service that we provide to them based on cost or based on a number of factors.
Thank you for that. Any questions on what Jeff just shared? Clarification? All right, the next item, the internal service fund charges. Any question about what that's included? What's included?
Yeah, what is it?
That's probably a little, that includes all of your charges for OPEB, health insurance, risk management, IT, facilities.
So like if an
Fleet.
employee pays their premium on that.
Right, so internal services are services we provide within the government to other departments. So they're usually allocated, for instance, with facilities, you would allocate it based on square footage charges. This room would be charged to human resources and through their budget, and all that's collected for facilities then to maintain the organization, or OPEB or health insurance, for instance. We figure out the charge out rate for per employee, then we charge each department for that employee cost, and we pull all that with the retiree cost into one fund, and then pay the health insurance bill and pay the claims out of a single fund. So it's a way to then allocate those charges throughout the organization.
But it's not necessarily like new money, is that correct?
No, it's double counted because
Okay.
it shows up on the expenditure side. So you'll see, for instance, when we were looking at this list earlier, and we had information technology on this list as an expenditure, that's directly proportional to the charge out and the revenue that comes into IT. There's also an IT expenditure line in every one of the cost centers and programs. So it washes itself out because it's internal to the organization.
All right, thank you. Investment revenue, any clarification requested on that in terms of where that comes from, anything like that? All right. Local option sales tax, any clarification requested on what's included in that? Non-enterprise charges for services. Questions?
Is that building permits?
That would be, yes, that would be mostly building permits, so those other fees that aren't related to a business type operation or an enterprise, so everything in the enterprise, water, sewer, solid waste, those are business type operations. The other things that would be included in non-enterprise are non-business type operations, libraries, fees, those kinds of fees that are just general services we provide, maps.
And then other revenue, other taxes. So any other questions of clarity that y'all would like? Okay. This is where we're going to start discussing guiding principles, and we are going to talk about individual departments in a minute, not by name, but just how to handle kind of the expense side. But here we're talking about the revenue side, the inflow side. So the staff would like to have some guiding principles. When you're looking at those different sources of revenue, for example, and let's say for whatever reason the county needed to increase revenues to provide certain services. Or let's say that the revenues were very strong and therefore we had the opportunity to reduce some of the controllable sources of revenue that we see up there. Essentially what the county staff would like is to get your thoughts on, are there some principles that they need to take into account when they're thinking about the revenue budget for fiscal year 19. When you look at any of those accounts, are there some that you say, let's not touch? Or if we need to grow revenues, let's target this area first. If there's an opportunity for revenue reduction, let's look at this area first. So any thoughts on guiding principles as it relates to revenues?
There's one thing as part of the fire department discussion, I'm assuming that we're incorporating this within other discussions we may be having. One thing I would like to learn is what would the effect be on creating new tax districts for fire services and also the merger of tax districts. So, you know, we've heard rumors of the merger between several of the towns. That creates one district, and does that change the revenue that we'll see as a county? Does that increase our revenue, decrease our revenue as far as sales tax? So I'd like to learn more about that. And then with the, you know, at the current, you know, one of the things at the current tax rate, what funds we generate, and if we're generating enough funds to cover the needs. And maybe also share that with the department heads of saying, okay, you know, as we look at that other chart, how everything pans out, you know, just like we did with schools, this is what the tax rate generates, your percentage of this would be this much of an increase, can you work within that budget? And can you decrease that budget? And then if we can stay the same or decrease the budgets, then use that money to do the things that we may need to do. The things that are, well, maybe the wish list, I guess, or the things that we have put off or could maybe bring back up.
Okay, so what I had noted here were 3 different points. The first 2 are impact related, make sure we have a good sense of the impact if we do create the new tax districts for fire, and then also if the mergers do happen, let's do some projections of potential financial impact.
Does that make sense? Well, and, you know, so if you have 4 that make 1, right, what kind of impact is it? Is it the rate, or is it the number of entities that's going to change how much money we get back or they get?
The way the calculation works, it's based on levy. Right. So it's a function of several things. It's a function of the value of the district plus the tax rates of all the county's tax rates and then all the municipalities' tax rates as well, because the way that it's divided out, you have to put this all into a big bucket and do several splits on it. So for Monday night, we have an estimate, and I'll explain the methodology a little bit. It's a little complex and it's hard to move forward, but we can talk about it in a bit.
And then the other point you had mentioned relates to revenue expectations. Obviously, there are budgeted amounts for fiscal year 18, but how are we actually tracking for fiscal year 18? And if there's a difference in terms of our revised expectations versus what was budgeted, how does that inform expenditures going forward? Is that correct? Is that generally what you're getting at? Okay. Other thoughts? Yes, sir. Mr.
I'd
Moore?
like to have information provided to us as, and I'm going to use the enterprise fund as an example, that it's 14% of our revenue. What's the cost comparison? I know that we have to prepare for future projects, so then give me the breakdown on what the cost comparison is. And another item that fire and several other things, the local option sales tax, understand better the distribution of sales tax, and I'm sure we'll talk Monday night on the impact of if we do a new tax district.
Okay.
On districts.
Okay, I just want to make sure I get that down.
I'm unclear on what kind of cost comparisons the Commissioner's looking for in that regard.
What does it cost to run your department?
What
You know,
operational.
from an operational standpoint, water to sewer,
Mhm.
what's the cost comparison to the revenues generated?
Okay,
Things of
okay,
that nature.
okay, I got it.
And
Thank you.
your part is probably the easiest
Yep.
to understand that because of the revenues generated.
Mr. Aikman's thoughts?
Sounds good.
Okay. Mr. Simpson?
Great.
Okay.
I want to brag on staff here for a second. There's the thing that you deal with intergovernmental. This is one of the lines with like the intergovernmental where we get money in from state grants or federal grants or whatever money we're getting in for to pay DSS employees, the 25 split, 75 split, 50-50 split. You know, what you did with changing the way what's overtime or comp time versus overtime, you know, that increased that revenue coming from state and federal government, correct?
Yes.
Those are the kind of things that's outstanding. I mean, I think that was really good thinking on your part to do that because, you know, with the comp time, we didn't get anything and we lost additional hours.
Last time, yes.
So, you know, when you said that you did that, I thought that was very good. If there's any other opportunities for that, please take advantage of them. But that was something that really impressed me throughout the year, was that you did fix that part of it.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes?
One thing we might briefly touch on is the fund balance. From time to time, that gets a little controversial about how big it is, how small it is, how it's utilized. So a clear understanding of its role in our budget would be helpful.
And that's not one balance, that's multiples that we need to understand, right? I mean, it's not just one fund balance, sometimes by category, you should say.
We have restricted, you have non-restricted, you have based upon board policy, yeah.
Or are you talking about across the funds? Are you talking about like the EMS fund balance, the fire fund
Across the
balance?
board, you know, if we have a category that has a fund balance, we need to understand that.
In terms of guiding principles, you've obviously laid out a lot of different pieces of information that you want to share. Commissioner Simpson, who had to leave a little while ago during the break, I asked him if he had anything he wanted to make sure that I shared with you all. His guiding principle was revenue neutral. You know, that's the phrase that he used as a guiding principle. And I wasn't sure if you had any thoughts on that as a potential guiding principle for staff, that literally, you know, whatever the projection is, it's quote revenue neutral. And I also wanted to give some definition to how you all, you know, how you all would state that, maybe similarly or differently. So any reaction to that being a guiding principle, revenue neutral?
Well, I don't want it to mean that we spend every penny we get. You know, part of that revenue neutral may be that we're setting aside for a rainy day fund or a major project. I know the enterprise fund has to do that. But it's also applicable in the rest of county government that we have a rainy day fund, I guess is what.
Okay. Other thoughts on how you would define that and whether you agree with that as a guiding principle, Mr. Rushing?
The only, I've said this before and continue to say it, the only way that we benefit every person who's an investor in Union County, from the guy that's just paying a property tax on his vehicle all the way up to our largest employers, is keeping that rate as low as possible. Whether it's, if we keep the rate the same or if we can drop the rate, that's important. That's economic, when we look at economic development, when we look at giving grants, when we look at doing things to help new companies come here, we also need to be aware that we could be hurting our existing companies. If every time we raise taxes, that goes to our existing companies. So keeping those rate low, keeping our utility rates as low as possible is the way that we help everybody, every single taxpayer in Union County, is by keeping those rates low.
So you're talking about, I'm sorry, to clarify, when you say rates, you're talking about
Property tax rate.
property tax rate? Okay. And keeping that stable where it is?
Or lower if possible.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Were there other points you wanted to make on that? Mr. Akins, thoughts on either the definition of revenue neutral or other guiding principles relating to revenue?
No, I think they pretty well covered it.
Mr. Simpson?
I think Stoney touched on it, the fact that sometimes that revenue neutral versus the tax rate, in other words, from year to year, you assume growth, and we've been in situations where we had negative growth, so we had to pull back. So to constantly be aware of our spending such that we can back that property tax rate down possibly each time along with that growth, or from the benefit of that growth.
So just to clarify one point, when we say, Mr. Helms said revenue neutral, we could define that as not spending all the revenue that comes in. Maybe there's a certain portion of that that could be put into a fund, saved for future use. Is there agreement on that point or clarification on that aspect of the definition of revenue neutral?
When I hear revenue neutral, I always think back to previous years on the board where we, if there was a revow, we had to drop the tax rate, and sometimes it wasn't dropped enough to make it revenue neutral. So if your income is one thing, if it's this much this year, if you don't drop it enough, you're still getting increased revenue. It's still a tax increase, but you're trying to keep everything revenue neutral. Where we're going to have a real challenge is with fire funding and changing fire districts or doing anything with that, is that keeping the you'll have some people go up, some people go down. It's very hard to do, very hard to keep everybody revenue neutral, just like during a revow. But we're going to have to explain that to people. We're going to, if you're paying a $100 fire fee and anything changes and now you're paying $75 in tax, people are not going to understand that. Some people are not going to see, they're just going to see the increase and not see the benefit.
So in other words, revenue neutral organizationally definitely will not mean every individual taxpayer is going to be revenue neutral.
I don't see how you do it with the changing anything with fire. I don't see how you change. There's some people going to pay a little more, some people going to pay less, some people may get out neutral, but it's going to be very hard to do that.
Mr. Akins, thoughts?
Well, I agree. My concern is when we talk about not just spending all the money and having a rainy day fund, I think we need to be very specific in what we're saving money for and being able to be transparent about that. Because clearly, anytime I see the government taking in additional money and putting it in coffers, then I'm of the opinion we need to be lowering taxes. So I think if we're going to do that, then we need to be very deliberate and very specific in where we're going to allocate those funds and what they're for.
Agreed.
Mr. Simpson, any additional thoughts on how you define revenue neutral?
No, I think Frank made my point was maybe it doesn't need to go in the rainy day fund, maybe we need to back down the tax rate. Return it to the taxpayer.
Okay. Right, so it's almost like there's two tiers of definition, revenue neutral at the organizational level. The first tier is what do we truly need to spend? And then the second tier is if there's a gap, does that gap result in us specifically identifying savings opportunity, putting it into a fund for a specific purpose down the road? Or does that give us the opportunity for a property tax rate decrease, something like that? Did I hear that correct, Mark?
The main point I was trying to make is just because we have X amount of dollars more, you don't go increase in staff or increase in expense that will reoccur year after year, just because you have more money coming in. Then you have to be frugal. I mean, we've got a number of facilities that need to be updated. And, you know, that might be a logical thing instead of passing a tax increase to, the sheriff's department has some very specific needs. And, you know, last thing I want to do is raise taxes to be able to accommodate his need. If we can plan for it and use our funds that we are surprised because of growth that we had.
I think one thing that Jeff's got an opportunity, and today, you're going to put out the bonds today, right? With what the school board is doing and reevaluating their $54 million that we'll be discussing with them, with what Jeff is doing with getting better rates, and what was the number, close to 13 million that you talked about? Yeah, so there's a lot of money that can be used, or savings that can be used to do that tax cut, while at the same time using our revenues that we get in from additional tax base, economic development, those things, to offset and do the projects that we need to start and get going. So just making sure that we're all aware on the same page of what's happening. There's projects that I would like to see, there's projects you all would like to see. We need to prioritize those and get those moving if we have opportunities like this coming up. And again, use the 3.09 cents. I assume that could be a potential to go down, especially if the school's working on their decreasing that $54 million need due to the McKibben report and the information that we just got back.
So I just want to, just one more time, confirm with the board, a guiding principle you want to have for staff is you want them to present you a budget that is revenue neutral. And if, for whatever reason, there is some opportunity for additional revenues beyond requested or projected expenditures, then at that point it's a question of not only what it could have been spent on, but if there is a gap, we need to specifically identify if we want to put that in a fund and what it's going to be used for later, or as an alternative, and or consider potentially lowering the property tax rate at that point. So that's the approach you want the staff to take as they start developing a budget for you for this upcoming fiscal year. Is that correct? Okay. Now I'll pause here for the county manager, for Jeff, for any others in the room. Do you need additional clarity on that guidance, or any questions about what they're requesting?
For me, it's very clear.
Okay. All right, Jeff?
I think we're good.
Sure. Okay, great. All right, thank you all. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at the expenditure side of guiding principles. And on the expenditure side, I want to start by looking at strategic objectives. So if y'all can take a look at the screen, and I'm actually going to read through one of these. I'll actually, just for saving my voice sake, I'll ask for volunteers in the room to read some of these as well. These are the 5 strategic objectives for the organization. Public safety, we've already talked about numerous times. In concert with our community partners, provide those essential services that protect the public's health, safety, and welfare. Can somebody read the community consensus definition, please?
By developing relationships based upon mutual trust and understanding, engage appropriate stakeholders to identify and successfully implement programs and initiatives that reflect the community priorities.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Can somebody read economic development, please? Brian, are you volunteering?
Sure.
Okay,
Sure. Through common vision and direction, becoming more business-friendly, economically vibrant, and sustainable community, by fostering development of a qualified workforce and infrastructure capacities to support current and future economic sustainability and growth.
Okay, so that'll teach you to come up with a long definition for
Yeah,
economic
give it a
development,
little
and I
bit.
shorten it next time.
Exactly.
Can somebody read sustainability, please?
Through collaboration with community partners, foster an environment that promotes affordability of services, conservation of resources, and preservation of a high quality of life to support and enrich a diverse and productive population.
Okay, thank you very much. And then organizational strengthening. Can somebody read that, please?
Develop and maintain a highly engaged workforce through shared values and clarity of purpose with the tools, training, and resources that support skills development, knowledge sharing and retention, and employee investment.
Okay, thank y'all for reading those. The reason why we're coming up with these is obviously we want the budget to align to the strategic objectives of this organization. So I just want to get refreshed on these, and I'm going to ask you all on this next slide to actually look at those strategic objectives and some examples of other ways that you all might set up criteria to make decisions. So when you're evaluating the draft budgets that are proposed to you as board members, one thing that came out of the one-on-one interviews that I had with y'all is you don't want to just see this is X dollars requested by a department or program or agency, especially if it's an increase, something new that is being requested above and beyond what you might typically expect to see. You said you also want to have some sense of what additional value is the community receiving from this additional investment, whether it's in equipment or people or in a program, whatever the case might be. So we want to make sure that the staff, when they're going through the process of building this budget, they are using the same criteria to make decisions in the draft budget that you're going to use when you're evaluating the budget. And a lot of times organizations, when they're determining value, how valuable is this additional impact I'm going to have on the community, this additional improvement of performance going to be, and does it really justify the additional expense that's going to be created? As an example, they'll look at some of these characteristics. They will say, I'm going to judge whether or not I'm going to approve this because it does or does not link to strategic objectives. Yes, I'm definitely going to improve this investment in additional staffing or expansion of services because I see economic development is going to happen. So yes, I'm good with that, or no, I'm not, because I really don't see how this fits into our strategic direction as an organization. ROI. Oftentimes you'll approve an investment and expense because you're going to have inflows that are going to offset that. So it makes sense. You're going to have the return on investment financially. It might be impact or outcome. You're going to make this investment because the quality of life in the community is going to be demonstrably better as a result of investing in this program or this service or this facility or whatever the case might be. Service performance. One point that Commissioner Lance Simpson made earlier on in the meeting was he was talking about response time. Is this investment going to improve response time for EMS or response time for code enforcement or response time for whatever service or program? That might be a reason why you would say and feel comfortable saying yes to this request from that department or that agency. Efficiency. If we make this investment, our cost per unit is going to drop. Or if we make this investment, our productivity is going to increase. So that might be a good justification for you to make a decision. And then quality. The quality of our services in public health, the health department, or whatever the case might be is going to be improved. So what I want y'all to do is, this is going to be another silent exercise just as a starting point, is I want you to think about when you make a decision about an investment. Maybe it's a particular department or agency or program that wants additional staffing or additional resources. And you want to say to yourself, well, how am I going to determine what value we're getting? How do you all define value? Maybe you define it exactly like this, or maybe there's a different way you look at this is the kind of way I want staff to present the value we're getting for this expense. Or another way to look at it is, let's say you're having to weigh two different options. It's Department A versus Department B, or Program A versus Program B, and you're trying to determine they both are requesting the same financial allocation, the same expenditure, but you're trying to weigh which one is really going to have more value for the community. How do you make that decision? So what I want y'all to do is to just take 3 or 4 minutes. Again, you can just write down some thoughts and basically give me your definition of value. Maybe it's 1 or 2 points there. Maybe it's some additional points that are considered, but I want to get a sense from you all when you're making those budgetary decisions, what criteria you're going to be using to make those decisions. Okay? Give you about 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll do a debrief. Thank you. Give you about 1 more minute, please. Okay, what I'd like to do is start by simply going around the table and just sharing what you came up with, and then we'll see if there's some synergy between the different ideas. I'll go in reverse order this time, starting with you, Mr. Akmus. So when you looked at that question about what decision-making criteria are you going to use to weigh those different decisions we talked about, how you define value, what were the points that you came up with?
Does it improve the level of service?
Others?
Does it grow the size of government, or are there opportunities to eliminate redundancy within the organization?
Okay.
And what have been the historical investments made in the area, and what were the results?
Okay, and we'll go back and talk about these more in a minute, but that's very helpful. That's right on point with what we're looking for. So, Mr. Helms?
I think your list is pretty thorough on your community consensus. I think we need to be very diligent to understand the total community. Sometimes some voices are very loud and may or may not reflect the total community. The other thing that, in efficiency, does it create cohesive workforce. Because I think we discussed it in our one-on-one, you know, an individual that feels like they're being treated fairly and respectfully will produce far better results, and it reduces turnover. Turnover is a very costly aspect of our workforce.
Okay. Any others? Okay, that's great, thank you. Mr. Simpson?
Well, I'll start off with strategic objectives. I know that early on, we came together as a board and decided what those were to be. I think it's important that you always continuously go back and review those because attitudes change, priorities change, and so public safety may not be the priority of a future board or this current board. So you need to constantly be evaluating those and applying those primary objectives to your budget decisions. Then for me, it comes down to, I sort of look at government from an individual taxpayer standpoint. You don't think a lot about it until you're that individual that wants some government services. And for me, we need to be extremely customer focused. We need to which relates to service and performance. If I go to the website and it's a crummy website, or if I need a perk test and it's going to take 6, 8, 10 weeks to get that done, if I go to the voting booth and it doesn't work, those are things that reflect on our ability to provide, or the quality of the services that we provide. Efficiency comes down when you get that tax bill going up, then you start complaining about the government and what they hadn't done for you. It goes down, you begin to believe that they may be doing a good job. And then in terms of quality, many times, and that goes back to what Richard said about community consensus, quality of services, quality of life, impacts long-term economic growth, and the quality of your overall communities.
Any other thoughts, Mr. Simpson? Okay, all right, great. Y'all are doing a good job. No pressure, Mr. Rush. The first week you've done excellent, so what did you come up with?
I wrote a list of stuff down and then prioritized them. The number one thing with budget that I think that we fail to do is educate the public. And when I say that, when we have a group of citizens that come before us and speak on an issue, whether it's fire funding, whether it's schools, any issue that we have, I cringe when I hear somebody that just is absolutely completely unaware of what's going on. You know, that they say something and it's completely opposite of the truth. And it's hard to call people out and say something because people look at you like, well, that's being mean to that person, or that's not being right. But in my job, you know, what I do is I train people to do what the law allows them to do. And I have to explain that to people. And I think that we miss a big opportunity in educating people. We have people that believe that schools in the western part of the county are swamped overcrowded. That's not the truth. That's completely opposite of any numbers that show those. I mean, I was here when those schools were overcrowded. I saw those schools overcrowded, and when they're at half the capacity that they can handle, and people are still saying our schools are overcrowded, that we've not done our job in educating people. So when the school budget comes up, people say, yeah, give the schools money, they're overcrowded, and they're not. When I see citizens come up, you know, we had elected officials that came up and completely misunderstood the way fire funding worked and completely misunderstood how people pay in one part of the county or the other. We need to educate the public, we need to educate the taxpayers as to what reality is. And I know there's political realities but there's number realities, and that's what we need to do. It's not a difference in opinion whether Jerry and I have a difference of opinion on something, whether a building should go to this place or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is, again, what are the numbers? Roads are horrible in western Union County. Roads are terrible. That's a reality. but schools are not overcrowded. So again, educating people of that. The impact to the whole county. A lot of times, we need to look at how it impacts every piece of the county, because we're asked from time to time to do a rezoning or to do something in one area of the county or another, and people don't understand why we, why this property, why do we want more commercial? It's to help the tax base in the whole county. Why are we not approving as much residential? Well, maybe that affects our utilities department or something. There may be a negative effect there. The duty to the residents and the taxpayers is extremely important. That, again, educating them to realities, not letting people misinform them. Numbers are, what school capacities are school capacities. That's not even, how many kids are in that school is a fact. It's not an opinion. How many, how good are our schools performing? How good are we doing it, as getting out and doing inspections? Are we doing inspections on time? Are we doing the things that we need to do as an organization? So the things that you have here are complete. I had the return on investment, the timeliness as issues. So I just really believe we could do a better job of educating our citizens and not go against political opinion, not be, where Frank may have an opinion on something, or Richard may have an opinion on something. Just lay the facts on the table, and if one person believes we need to go in one direction and another person believes we need to go in a different one, that's fine. But at least the facts are on the table, and people can see why we make the decision we make. I think when we blur the facts, or when we try to work on emotion, we do the citizens of the county a disservice. If we want our children educated to be the best workforce and the best educated kids in the state, we should also go to everybody and look and say every person in Union County, every taxpayer should be as information, full of information as we can possibly give them. And there's ways to do that and not affect opinion. And I think that's what we need. I think that's the overall thing, is that, if we can educate the public as to how much money we're getting in, why their taxes are going up, why their taxes could go down, what do we need to do. These information sessions are going to help do that, I hope. But we need to do everything we can to whether it's website, social media, whatever we have to do to get that information out.
Okay. Great, thank you. And you did a fine job. I know they set a high bar, but you did a good job, so I appreciate that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize what y'all came up with and make sure that that's clear, that I understood it correctly, and then ask the staff if they need any clarity as far as that goes. So again, the idea here is that when you all are looking at the budget, you're going to be making certain decisions, obviously, and you definitely said in those one-on-one interviews, you want to be able to not just look at the expense, but the value that's associated with it. So if the staff is actually developing that budget, we want to make sure they're looking at this budget and these decisions through the same lens that y'all are going to be looking at it through. So first point that Mr. Akins came up with was, does it improve the level of service? That gets at the staff needing to show service levels over time, or projected service levels in the future. Actually, we think this is going to be the improved turnaround time, or the improved quality of the service provider, the improved customer service, being able to articulate how the level of service is going to be improved. Does it grow the size of government or offer opportunities to eliminate redundancies? So with the second point, I assume you're saying if they can show that this is actually going to help us to eliminate redundancies, be a little bit more streamlined, that's got a better chance for a thumbs up. When you say, does it grow size of government, I can make an assumption, but can you just clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, are we spending money in an area that's going to show these other benefits, the level of service, eliminate redundancy, or is it just creating another position within staff that doesn't really add to any of those other arenas?
Gotcha. So does it just grow the size of government, or are we doing this because it eliminates other redundancies or improves service level, that sort of thing? Okay. Historical investments made and results. So this is more of a look back that have we contributed or made more investments in this particular service area in the past? And if so, what was the value we got? If we did receive value, that would make you all more confident in your decision, to invest in that particular program area again. Did I interpret that correctly?
Correct.
Okay. For Mr. Helms, you talked about community consensus, understanding the total community, so make sure we're not just focusing on one constituent group that we're really looking at, or we're being informed by the voice of all of the community, all the citizens, all the taxpayers, all the areas when we're making these decisions. So if the staff can show that we made this decision not in a vacuum, but we actually got community input on this program or the need, or somehow we've tried to gauge the sense from the community that it could impact multiple different areas, geographic locations, that would be a positive if the staff could show that. Is that what
Yeah,
you're getting at?
and I think Stoney brought up a good point, because, schools is a good example. You may have one school that is overcrowded or has needs, and they may not say anything, but you got another that really has what they need, if not more, and they are vocal. So you need to understand the total picture of the needs across the county.
When you're talking about efficiency, you took a couple different approaches to that. One was looking at the workforce itself. Can we make the workforce more efficient? Does this investment or this option that's being provided to you all, does it actually in some way make the workforce work together better across different department lines or different facilities, whatever the case might be? Does it somehow improve the climate where we can say our turnover is going to be reduced, because there's obviously a cost of high employee turnover? Those would be the kind of things you'd like the staff to present, and that might weigh you towards supporting a certain
Well,
investment.
you take, we have a number of departments that require certification. Not losing those individuals would help us with our efficiency. And so we have to maintain an environment where people want to work in Union County, and that when we go out to seek people, our reputation is such that I want to work there. So you get a lot more effective work out of individuals that have the respect on both sides for us as a county and for them, and so we get a lot more efficiency out of it. People that are happy at work will create 110% work ethic, as opposed to it's a job and
That's a great point. And then it impacts the work environment too that you were just
Oh, yeah.
referencing. So the next point you talked about service and performance. You want to see very customer-focused service. If you can show that this option or this investment is going to reduce turnaround time, or it's going to improve quality service, or more broadly, if the staff can show this is the impact we expect on the quality of life for the community as a whole, that would make it more likely for you to approve a certain investment or select option A over option B, if those were parts of the value showed. Is that correct? Okay. And that point, I think, may have been for Mr. Simpson as well. Mr. Simpson talked about an important point. Just make sure we're revisiting these strategic objectives that we had looked at on a yearly basis or every other year, and just kind of confirming with the board that, yes, these objectives still apply as the top priorities that we're going to use to guide decision-making down the road. So, Mr. Simpson, any other points or clarification?
No, to your point about being very customer-focused, I think that ties into what Richard said from the standpoint of, if you would go to the various departments throughout the county and you would ask an employee, who do you work for? Do they say they work for Public Works? Do they work for the library? Or do they say, I work for the citizens of Union County? That individual is looking you face to face is who you work for. They pay taxes, they pay your bills. So then it behooves us to come back and provide them with everything they need, such that they will be effective in what they do, that they'll have the resources to be able to provide that service on a timely basis. And that falls on our plate as commissioners to understand their needs and apply what limited resources or limited revenues we may have to those that are most in need.
All right, that's a great point. And then Mr. Rushing, I know he talked a good bit about educating the public, and you can look at that two different ways. One is just in general, when the county does great work, there is an investment decision that's being made that we're educating the public. on why we're making the decision. You know, we're making it because historically, this particular program really gets a lot of great value out of the investments they make. They've proven their quality has risen over time, or they've proven turnaround time is going to increase. Or the reason why we're going in this direction is we know it's going to actually reduce our turnover. We're going to keep more certified, high-quality people, which will result in more high-quality services to the community. So one way to look at educating the public is literally when these kind of decisions are made, making sure we're also at the same time saying, how do we communicate the reasons why we're making these decisions? Maybe another way to look at that is just in general, if some department or agency or program is making a request, if they can show that this request is actually going to result in a more informed public, where the public somehow is going to learn more of the facts about services provided, about how funding works, about what the core functions are, why certain decisions are made, that would be something that would lend you all to more likely approve something if part of the focus of whatever that investment or request is, it is really something that builds educational or builds the knowledge of the public, the citizens, the businesses, et cetera. They also talked about impacting the whole company, the whole county. So if you're presented with a budget request, or maybe there's the two different options example, and one really applies to maybe 10 or 15% of the constituents in the county or the geographic area. The other's requesting a similar investment, but it really impacts the entire county. Then you might be more likely to support that option that has that broader impact on the county. You talked about ROI, so literally if it is budget neutral, what somebody's requesting, there's going to be some offsetting cost reduction down the road, or some revenue that's going to offset the cost that is being requested. That might make you more likely to approve it. And then timeliness, which we talked about there as well under service performance. If we can show we're getting the inspections done more quickly, or our turnaround time is faster, or we're getting to those clients and human services more quickly, we can show that kind of value. That might make you more likely to approve a budget request. So did I interpret those pretty clearly for y'all? Okay. And you did a good job in terms of articulating this, but before we move on from this, again, the purpose is if this is a criteria you're going to use to evaluate expenditures or different options, we want to make sure staff are using that same criteria as they're helping to build a preliminary budget for y'all to review. So I just want to pause and ask the folks in the room, do you have any questions about this criteria that's been identified? Ed?
You know, just in looking at the criteria that's been spelled out, in my perspective, this is looking mostly at new initiatives. And I think that's kind of the framework that has been laid out. And we're still one of the fastest growing counties in the state. So when we talk about level of service, I know in my business unit, there is additional resources that get requested each year to maintain a level of service to deal with growth. And I didn't hear any reflection on that in this discussion, that there's some of it we hope to be more efficient. We hope to implement better new programs to be able to be as efficient as we can. But there's still that underlying reality of growth in service demand because of growth in customer base and with our citizen base.
Yeah. So, and obviously, I mean, if the community grows, revenues grow, flows grow by 10%. I mean, there may be some understanding that for those areas that are serving the public, there's going to have to be a proportionate growth. But I don't know if this is a question for the county manager or the board, but when you talk about something like Ed is referring to, are you looking for that value proposition to be defined on those proportional growth requests, or primarily for when you're having to evaluate two different programs versus each other, new equipment or new services or new staff? In other words, when are you looking for this type of value criteria? On virtually everything, or primarily through those additional requests that are going to be out there?
My only comment would be is, I totally agree with Ed, is that from the standpoint, we need to constantly be aware there's additional costs that are there in order to maintain that level of customer service. We can't let our current customers deteriorate while we're focusing on new initiatives.
Yeah.
So we need to meet those needs first, then worry about something new.
That's a good point, because the other way to look at what Ed was just suggesting is, let's say he needs to make a 10% increase, just for sake of numbers, I'll make it simple, 10% increase. Maybe one way you can look at it, if there are any questions, is in theory, he's having to do that because these service levels are going to drop if he doesn't. I mean, our turnaround time is going to drop, the quality of services is going to drop, maybe there might be some revenue, additional fees that are requested, whatever the case might be if he doesn't do that. So just like with a new service, we're expecting performance to improve or hoping to see some value, even if there's a request for just having a proportional increase in budget because the demand's gone up. Just be prepared to be able to articulate, well, he needs the X% additional staffing or expenditure, because if not, we're going to see these major service levels drop, bottlenecks occur, those sorts of issues. So not necessarily requested on every standard budget, but it's possible those kind of conversations or requests for information could come down the road. You know, what bad could happen if the request is not approved, even if it is just that kind of proportional increase. Yes, sir.
I'm a big believer in many hands make light work, and one complaint that the citizens have, and I think it's completely justified, is like when you look at the increase in the water and sewer rates and the increase in, you know, whether we're increasing taxes or whatever we're doing, it seems like with more people that we should be more efficient, not less efficient, not more expensive. More people on the roads, that's a completely legitimate complaint that people have. But you know, when you have more customers, you know, why can't that cost go down some? What is driving the cost? Is it these new things that we're wanting to do that's driving the cost? Are we creating more problems when we look at our commercial to residential base? Utilizing our utilities to set that standard. I mean, we can always, I believe, make it where we reserve for commercial, that we have things available that if those businesses want to come. Whenever I speak to developers who are interested in doing a project, what I look at is uncertainty of availability of things, water and sewer. So I want to make sure that we've got it there for the things that make us money. If it's something that's not making us money, something that's going to cost us money, maybe we should be looking at that even harder and making those decisions as to growth, whether there's rezonings, whether it's reserve policies, anything like that. But I think a real argument that our citizens have is that my utility rates increase to pay for new stuff, new growth, and I hope that that's not the case. But if it is, we need to really evaluate that.
Yeah, from what I'm hearing, it's almost like, again, to go back to the 10% example, let's say the population grows by 10%, demand grows by 10%. If Ed comes back and says, well, we need to meet those services, but we'll only meet it by increasing expenditures by 4%, then there's a certain reduction in cost per unit. You know, there's an efficiency gain that makes sense. And I'll just keep, since we have the same name, we'll just keep talking about you. But
I flinch every time I hear Ed being asked to do something.
Really? Okay. Even if they ask me?
Yes.
But if it's a 10% increase in demand, 10% increase in the population, or increase in population, and he's requesting 10%, then it gets back to the why. I mean, we really have to be able to justify why we're not gaining efficiencies, you know, as the organization grows, as the community grows. Because obviously that's going to be important to the taxpayer. And if we can justify this, and it's very clear, it's very fact-based, then that's great, but y'all might be less likely to support the full 10% increase if we can't clearly articulate with facts why that full, proportional increase is required.
The school is another example. We have this, when a school is at half capacity, and then people are complaining about any kind of growth in that area to help increase the capacity, which should make the school more efficient, because the school bus runs whether there's 4 kids on it or 8 kids. The classroom is whether it's got 10 kids or 20 kids, they all work. The cafeteria folks, they still have to work. The janitors still work. The principals and the vice principals, and everybody's still there. So that efficiency of having more people there, we really need to look at that and see. I mean, you know, there's going to be a lot of changes that come in the next few years, not just with, you know, hopefully the redistricting fixes a lot of the problems that were created years ago. But it's, again, why do more people not make it better, more efficient?
Okay. And I'll just add this in here in terms of, you know, cost per unit, because that's where efficiency will really show up. You know, if you are increasing output by a certain amount, but the input doesn't increase that much, then the cost per unit's going down, the efficiency's improving, and it's clear that you're getting those economies of scale as you're growing. Okay. Ed, did that help?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Again, for the staff, any other questions of clarification that y'all need in terms of these guiding principles? Anything at all?
I'd like to say this about public safety. It's probably the only thing up there that affects every person in this county. It's not economic driven, it is public safety. Public safety is one of the drivers that makes this such a growing county. When you can look on the internet and see that we've had 25% decrease in crime, that's what people look at. I'm gonna say when Amazon, if it happens to come to Charlotte, 50,000 jobs, a big portion of those people are gonna live in our county. It is gonna grow our county. Public safety drives a register of deeds. It drives public works. It drives everything in this county. And it also, if it fails, it also stops all the economic growth, and it also stops everything. But we've been very fortunate. Our manager and our commissioners have supported public safety. And it's not just law enforcement. It is fire departments and EMS and the EMTs and the hospitals and the schools, the safety in our schools, where our school resource officer, if you don't have that portion, then you don't have to worry about the rest of it. So that's my input.
Yeah, and that helps, especially when you talk about quality of life. You know, there's a lot of assumptions people make. I'm going to live in a safe, secure community and that sort of thing. And so then a lot of the other points that you're referencing benefit from that. But in fact, if the assumption that quality of life's not there because of concerns over public safety, then yeah, it does put a lot of the other aspects of you know, what it takes to grow and thrive in a community a little bit at risk. So thank you for sharing that. Any other comments anybody wants to make about these guiding principles before we take our next break? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think we talked about your 10% growth or whatever. I think sometimes, and it's not just the county, a lot of places, you end up hiring more officers than you do the enlisted. I'm trying to be politically correct, you know, but the fact of the matter is the sheriff has grown his department with people that actually deliver the work. And he's managed it with managers, but that he currently has for the most part. Of course, there's always a time when you grow so fast you have to have some additional. But sometimes we grow ancillary and manage upper management faster than we have the people that are doing the day-to-day work. And we need to focus on that.
All right, that's helpful. Okay. Any other comments anybody has? All right, time now, 10:35. Y'all want to take another 10-minute break? Would 10 minutes work again? Take one more 10-minute break, and then the county manager will walk through a draft and the new budget process.
Just don't touch that thermostat.
Thank you.
Going to continue on, and with that, I recognize the county manager.
Thank you, and I don't know that it's a good place for me to stand, but we did hand out to everyone what I'm about to go over, and the intent is for me to kind of go over at least what staff's concept was with respect to budget workshops that we would have with the board, and kind of when we would hold those specific sessions, and then get feedback from you all today as to whether or not that meets your criteria or not. I'm going to ask Michelle to kind of be my scribe for any changes, since if I wrote on that board, you wouldn't be able to read it, and I wouldn't be able to read it later either. So, We start in October, and actually that's today, in establishing the priorities and baseline assumptions that you all are looking forward to with respect to the fiscal 2019 budget. Then in November, there are 2 topics that we will be covering with you. Actually, there are 3. One is that we will be presenting to you on the 20th the CAPR results for last fiscal year, as well as one of the things that we do a lot in the budget is we refer to our financial policies. And those are financial policies that really have been developed primarily over the last probably 5 to 6 years. And some of you were on the board at the point in time those policies were developed, other of you were not. So we think it's probably appropriate for us to review with the board what those policies are, so that if this board would like to make some adjustments or amendments to those policies, that would be appropriate, as well as, my guess is it establishes a baseline for you all, because you may not be aware of all of the financial policies that have been adopted over the years by the board. The third session that we have on the 20th, and I think we scheduled it for 6 o'clock, is we do have a joint meeting with the Board of Education. The topics that at least I have discussed with the superintendent on the 20th is the results of the McKibben study, their student reassignment committee that they have been working with and kind of where they are with respect to that process, as well as what do they see looking forward as it relates to their capital needs based upon that new information that they have received as to the population decline within our schools. And what I'm going to do, you can stop me at any point in time if there is something that you, yes sir?
No, my question, the financial policies review, I think is an excellent opportunity. I assume we're going to do it at the regular commission meeting?
Yes, sir.
Can we have some information a little early on that so we can study it, so we can prepare
Absolutely. And I will tell you, there are quite a number of them. And if you've ever gone to the back of the budget book, they are all listed in there.
Okay.
Some of them are mandated by state, so that there is nothing that we can do to amend those. But some of those are in fact policies that have been adopted by this board or prior boards that I think from an educational perspective, as well as to ensure that that is where this board wants as an organization for us to continue to go in that direction.
And to clearly be outlined as to which policies
Yes,
are
we will.
mandated by state.
Yes, because some you will not have an option in changing.
It's in our budget book.
But we can,
Yes, sir.
we can send it to you in advance.
Yes.
Well, I mean, if it's in our budget book, we can go back and look at that. If there's any particulars you want us to focus on, that would be helpful.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Then in December, and we know December is kind of a crazy month because of the holidays, but we do anticipate bringing one of the topics back that you all have identified today out of the 5 that were generally discussed, and then there will be subsequent ones I anticipate. But in December, coming back to you with one of the topic work sessions. And what we are going to attempt to do, as I talked a little bit about earlier, is that we will try and group some of these, and we will try to hold them on the same dates that you have Board of County Commissioners meeting. So we will have a work session prior to your regular board meeting primarily for scheduling and convenience sake. Then when we go into January is when we will do your fiscal year financial update and year-end projections. By then, we have closed out the books. And one of the issues that we have in doing that any earlier is because we have such a lag in sales tax. I think it's
2 months.
2 months. Is that to get a really good handle on where we are, we need sufficient enough data to be able to present to you a pretty good overview as to what we think our projections are going to be as we move forward. We will also give you our initial revenue forecast for fiscal year 19 based upon the information we have available to you. And then there will also be another board topic that has previously been identified. And right now we haven't inserted what those are. We're going to have to look at each of those and say, okay, when will we have the appropriate information so that we can provide you with the information that you are looking for. Then as we go into February, and what you will see in each one of these months is that we each month are going to give you an update on our revenue forecast. In years past, we have done that at the beginning of the budget cycle, and then you probably don't hear it again until very close to the end of the budget cycle. So what we are proposing this year is to do it on a monthly basis. And there may not be a lot of movement month to month, but we at least have that slotted as information that we will provide to you all so that you have an update as close as we are able to gauge it as to where our revenue projections are going to come in for the next fiscal year. We will also, there's a lot of discussion about capital planning prioritization. One of the things and we absolutely agree, we have not spent as much attention on that as an organization as we should. And so what we will do, and we will send that out to you in advance, is develop a list of all the capital projects that are out there. And there are a number that have been out there probably since the early 2000s that have been on some list or another, and have the board prioritize what they believe is appropriate. And then in March, thank you, my eyesight is still. Then in March, we will bring that back to you with a funding methodology for each of those. Some of those may be with fund balance, with existing resources we have. Some may be short-term debt. Some may require a bond initiative. So we agree, I think we need to become much more structured as an organization as it relates to our capital plans, but really need your input as to what your priorities are as a board in developing that. And then we will have another board topic information session in February. And based upon the amount of information that we are looking at, it'll probably be each one of your meetings. We may have a very short segment before your regular meeting, or in some cases a longer segment. But for the next several months, you will have a relatively busy schedule with respect to your board meetings. March, again, we will do the revenue estimates update, as well as review of the overall base budget assumptions and priorities based upon the input that you have given us today. And then we are looking for the capital planning adoption at that point in time based upon your input that we receive. Then in April, looking at the third quarter revised revenue projections, another board topic, and then looking at, that would be an appropriate time for you to have a joint meeting with the Board of Education. By then, they should be relatively close to having their budget formulated, and should be able to present to you all what they are looking for fiscal year 19. Then in May, I would present the proposed operating capital budget to you, and then we may look at actually doing a straw vote as it relates to that particular budget, and then in June actually doing a budget adoption. So based upon the discussions that we have had today, does this meet the board's objectives in trying to get information that you are looking for? And do you have particular topics that you would like to hear sooner versus later? And if you could share those with us, and then we can get back with you depending on what kind of information we have to collect in order to meet that objective as to whether or not we will be able to do that or not. But I'd like to have your input.
Well, I think we need to do fire funding as soon as possible.
Well, we are doing a session this Monday. It's very global as it related to taking all of the fee districts and what that looks like as to, based upon a very preliminary look at it as to what it would take to support those fee districts through a tax. My guess is the consultant, even fast tracking it, you are probably not going to have results from the consultant probably until, I would say, March or April.
I don't think we can wait till March or April to attack the fire issue. I mean, I think, one, they can validate assumptions that we made, or we can tweak it, but I think we've got a lot of work.
Well, what they will be doing as soon as they are selected is obviously there'll be a lot of data gathering, and they will get information from us that we have through tax administration. My guess is they will talk to some of the fire departments. They will talk to, there'll be a lot of data collection. I don't see this as being a one session in which they present their results to you. I anticipate that they're, as they go along in the process, presenting to you what they have found, what some of the issues are, and kind of the direction they're going in. So, but I do see probably the final results will be probably about the March timeline. And we have, as part of the RFP, have said that this information has to be presented to us in sufficient enough time for it to be included as part of the budget process.
But doesn't the fire individual departments have to provide their budget proposals to you?
Usually in
during that time
February,
frame?
usually in February they do. But I see that as separate and distinct because at that point, they're really not focused on what is my funding source. They are focused on what are our needs from a capital investment, human resources, as well as operating cost. So even if that component is not known, knowing what their needs are and going through that evaluation, if the board adopts the Public Safety Advisory Board, that's on your agenda for the 6th, using that as also a means to vet that information so that you're really looking at what the needs are versus what are the associated resources to meet those needs. But we will, I hear the board very loud and clear, we will do everything we can to expedite it, but as some of you know firsthand, the process that you all went through in trying to vet what is an appropriate funding source, and it took a number of months, even working with a working group. Other areas that you would like to see sooner versus later with respect to the topics that you identified?
Or even, I think, if there are things here that you'd like to, I mean, we put these in places we thought made sense, but if there's something in March that you'd rather see in January, if you could let us know that, we can start to schedule that.
You lost the gift of gab with me. Now with Ed, you were very interactive.
I would just say it looks good to me with regard to the board topic information sessions. You said that fire needed to be a priority, but I'm not sure I can name all 5 or 7 or how many we have at this point. Maybe staff input based on the information you have would be more logical to put them in that particular chronological order as opposed to me suggesting.
Yeah, one of the things we can do is we can look at those topic areas that you all have identified and look at what kind of resources are going to be necessary to pull that information together. I did hear environmental health is definitely an area that you all want to explore sooner versus later. I think, I had a discussion with Michelle last week. We're already starting to put together some of that information. So that may very easily be one of the topics we discuss in December, because I think we'll probably be in a pretty good place to where we'll have the information so that we can share it with you. So if that meets the boards, we can kind of plug in where we think they will go, present it to you, and if you all want to make adjustments as it relates to we would like to see this item moved up to here, or as Michelle had indicated, if there are any other items with respect to when we present some of this information, you will, like I said, you do see repeats in each month as to the revenue estimates. We did look at the financial update and year-end projections to see if there was any way we could do it in the month of December. But we really do believe that January is where you're going to have that information, probably a little bit more solid than you would in December. And then we will update that on a monthly basis.
Perhaps we could add to our November 20th agenda, a budget calendar adoption.
Okay. So kind of fill in
Where you
the gaps and
anticipate
then
things.
get you all to give
Right.
us your input and adopt. Any other input or questions from the board? Okay, that's the only role I had today. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ed, who has some next steps, and then I'll just make some closing arguments, and you may actually get out of here a few minutes early this month. The gift of time.
I know I only have one slide left, but it's actually a slide I'm going to spend 58 minutes on, so I hope that's okay with everybody. In terms of what we're going to do next, essentially there's a lot of information you all have shared. I know several people are taking notes. We will definitely compile the information, provide a summary back, so not only are the staff clear on your guidance and direction that you want, but that you have a summary as well, and if there is any need to refine what we provide, you can take a look at that. Obviously, the staff's going to modify the budget plans and approach based on the feedback that you've given on this, and then obviously at the November 20th meeting, they'll present a specific updated version of this with all the individual work sessions listed, begin planning for those work sessions, and then again, all the guiding principles that y'all provided is going to inform their approach to how they communicate to the department heads about budget submission, what kind of principles and additional value-oriented information that staff needs to provide, and therefore, when those meetings occur and those internal decisions are made in building this preliminary budget, it's based on those guiding principles that y'all provided. So those are the immediate next steps. Before I hand it back off to the county manager, any other questions either about what we discussed today or how this information is going to be used moving forward?
Will you participate in the information sessions as we go forward, or what's planned?
No, that then becomes staff and board,
Okay.
and any of the other participants like the Board of Education or anyone else
Okay.
that is involved in those.
Other questions, comments?
Make a comment to what the sheriff said. I spoke to him out in the hallway, and the better job we do, the more people are going to want to move here. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a bad problem. The better the schools are, the more people want to live here, the better the crime rate is. More people are going to move here, and we have a lot of challenges ahead of us. But I appreciate every board member that we've got. I think we all try to do the best we can for the citizens, whether we agree or disagree. And thank everybody in here, all the staff members that work hard too.
Thank you for sharing that. Any other comments anybody would like to share? I'll hand it back off to the county manager.
And mine is just very quick, and then you all can get on with the rest of your day. I really did just want to thank the board and the directors, as well as the sheriff and Dottie and Crystal for joining us today. I really think that this is key for us having a successful budget for fiscal year 2019. I appreciate you taking the time. I think the feedback that you've given us is very helpful and will help form the budget that you will eventually have an opportunity to review and adopt. And this is intended to be a fluid process, so as we go through it and adjustments needs to be made, certainly with board direction, we will make those adjustments. So I do just want to thank you very much for the attention that you've given this today, and I really do appreciate the input.
All right, thank you. Motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye.